16 times the space grind.
Brought to you by TheYamiks Patreon. Greatest way to support your favorite Latvian. But seriously, thank you. This year of 2020 is going to be rather interesting in space games. A few space sims, a bunch of interesting normal games, and some that question the sanity of developers who chose to dip their toes into this pool of questionable game design and weird Kickstarters. I'll go over most space games that are actively being made and not insanely old, like EVE Online. And yes, actually here's an update on EVE Online. It's still alive. I frankly don't know how, but like Fast and the Furious movies, it still somehow draws breath. Anyhow, first we'll go over the upcoming releases this year and then move on to the early access nonsense and finish off with the update on our sub-genre leading and released games. I also tried contacting all the developers, so depending if they answer their emails, I'll have more or less information for you today. We start, of course, with this year's biggest release, Starfield. The game was announced a long time ago, with just one shitty nondescript teaser trailer that said, well, nothing. Then, in 2021, during one of those industry circle jerk events, I think it was the Game Awards circle jerk? Well, regardless, Microsoft, who now owns Bethesda, released actual cinematic trailer, which invoked a lot of Star Citizen vibes. So that definitely means that it will be garbage and not like the trailer at all. I mean, by default it's the Bethesda game, so that goes without saying, I guess. Still, only worthwhile information that we got was that it's going to be PC and Xbox exclusive. Yay, Microsoft. Additionally, they released some concept art, but let's just be fucking real, that means as much as my morning shits. So, we can only hope for actual gameplay trailers sometime in the middle of the year, when they will start building hype. The next big release for this year most definitely will be a banger. Well, hopefully. Kerbal Space Program 2. After its trials and tribulations, finally it's coming to fans, and all that the fans can hope is that with all the developer issues and publisher fuckery, the game itself will be at least a good one. Visually, a few sparse clips in the developer logs show certainly an appealing change for the franchise, but the gameplay has always been the king for Kerbal, so all that's left now is to wait and see, really. Now, while I was visiting a little game developer conference here in Latvia, I spotted a rather interesting little 2D game, Blastronaut, a mix of Terraria and No Man's Sky as I personally describe it, and this year you might spot it in early access. Now I played around with its demo and it seems quite solid on the basics, so now it'll be interesting to see what becomes of it once it goes public. Oh, and Estonians represent, this is one of your small developers. As I was going through the new releases, I stumbled upon the Spaceborne games. The first game came out back in 2018, and now, this year, the second game is being launched. Frankly speaking, it kinda does look like a space game, but I can't shake the asset flippy feel and look from it. Moreover, the second game also looks very similar to the previous one. However, I would be remiss if I didn't say that I felt also some dedication from the makers, so for the new release, the best of luck, I guess. On a very different note, Homeworld 3 is being released this year as well. While it is a real-time strategy game, it's also one of the more known space games too. It's releasing in December and, well, frankly, the end of the year is starting to look quite packed. Oh, and it's also being published by Gearbox. Well, still, developer Blackbird Interactive's last game, Hardspace Shipbreaker, was critically well received, so at the very least you can say developers are solid. Additionally, this year will be also filled with some Deadspace and Deadspace-like games. First off, the remake of the first game is releasing this year, and frankly, the original was a really great game. So, potential to fuck up is great. I mean, it's EA after all. The biggest companies make the biggest crap, but who knows? And then, the co-creator of Deadspace decided to go off and make his own Deadspace, now called the Callisto project, also releasing this year, but from the looks of things, well, who knows? Cinematic trailers can go suck an egg, but it will be interesting to see the contrast, the original, the remake, and the spiritual remake. Now then, returning to real-time strategy games a little bit. Fragile Existence, a single-person developed game that aims to be on early access this year. Overall, it really looks impressive for a one-man project, and kinda reminds me a little bit of Planet Annihilation game, which also, by the way, is still being updated too. I've been told that single-player and skirmish will be on early access release, with mod tools. And sure, while I might not prefer to play games like these all the time, I'm really happy to see genuinely impressive and promising creative work coming up. This year, Flight of Nova also will be presenting its public demo, a space atmospheric flight sim. Overall, the project in public side will be for the first time, so at this point it's hard to tell whether it's good or bad. However, everything, like the ships in the game themselves, all have potential, if only just kinetic. And to finish the upcoming game releases, Falling Frontier, another real-time strategy game, is slated for Q2 release. Visually, it's solid, but then that can also be said about any game. It's the first game from Stutterfox Studios, so which way it will go is still unclear, but it looks promising nonetheless. And now we move on to more playable games. Most of these are in some form of early access. Basically games that sacrificed their first impressions by releasing and now are developing. That or they wanted to double dip on launch events. Either which case I tend to be rather annoyed by this category due to how often developers abuse it. But there are fantastic projects that succeed beyond expectation, which sometimes feels worth it, dredging through the muck. So, I wonder, which of these are the muck and which the gold nuggets? We start off with a promising game called Hunternet, mainly a space combat game that tries to show up the leading space sim titles how a proper space pew-pew is done. Additionally, adding some key space sim features and mechanics, mainly though you can feel Star Citizen influence here, which I too tend to call a better system, with key exceptions like the max speed, but overall the project is very focused, and worth keeping an eye on for sure. This also is a solo developer project, which becomes even more impressive considering how much information on planned development is there available and set up. As said, very focused, which is rare to see. As for the year's plan, VR support, static server meshing, and most importantly early access release, as up until now it's been in closed playable version. On a different note, although Icarus on Steam shows up as a fully released survival FPS game, you know, Ark, Rust and the like are in the same bucket as well, overall the game's looking pretty nice on the trailers with some fancier cinematography and live action bits to sell this thing. However, since its release on 3rd December 2021, rating on Steam is still mixed, and it's been improving, sure. But it's clear, yet another beta released as a full game. And one may be wondering at that, if you're not just better off playing Rust or Ark in this case. Coming from the last year's surprise, the gem that is Spacerift Arcanum is another space combat / space sim-like game developed by a single person. This Russian-made space sim thing has been updating, and for this year, destruction of stations, system battles, AI, and network improvements, and more story is the go-to. Overall, I've become fond of this game and wish it the best. Oh, and it also has a demo version, so enjoy! Last year's most successful release, Everspace 2, this year's continuing its early access development, and unlike Icarus, it could actually pass as a full game for a while now. Rockfish, the developers, have put in impressive and reliable work into both of the Everspace games, so it's such a pleasure to see this game succeed. And to make the deal even better, this game too has a demo version, so do check it out. Now that I think of it, Space Game Shunder right now is releasing more games with demos than all others. You know, I'm fucking proud of you fuckers! As for this year's plan, well, developer released a whole year's worth of roadmap for the things they want to add. There is quite a bit of content update in spring as well as summer and fall after Gamescom, quite a bit of change for the game as well. And more importantly, for the next year or early next year, they plan on finally releasing the game as a finished game. Next up then are two games developed by, well, more or less the same developer. EarthX, a simpler Kerbal-like game released on early access in 2019, and Rings of Saturn, a physics-based 2D mining sim, also released in 2019, and also on early access. As for EarthX, for this year the plan is to finally leave early access and release as a full game, a certainly rare but welcome sight. And the same thing goes actually, but with an uncertain date, for Rings of Saturn. 2 games, early access shedding projects. Certainly nice to see. Oh, fuck me. Dual Universe, right. A French-made subscription-based voxel sandbox or survival, whatever. Still in early access beta since 2020, the game basically tries to build its universe by making you do it, and trying to keep every creation persistent, unless of course the author changes it. Overall, the idea is okay, but in this day and age, a subscription-based game, let alone one that barely has consistent frame rates or good visuals, makes you kinda reconsider it quick. Additionally, developers themselves seem to be rather arrogant with their ruling and banning of players. Now, you see, there was this one time when developers themselves forgot to play the game right and didn't close off to anyone else their own creations, you know, official trading posts and positions like that, so that no one could alter them. And naturally, players found it, and then got banned for it. Later they doubled down on their decision for this and a few other questionable decisions, so personally I would not consider this game worth anyone's time. The mega space battle simulator Infinity Battlescape has well been chugging in early access since 2019, and though developers tell me that a full release is unlikely this year, what is likely is gameplay loop rework, minor and major feature addition, and more varied gameplay as well. So overall it sounds pretty busy year for Innove team. Oh gods, I butcher the name every time. Sorry guys. Then of course we come to the granddaddy of overbloated mess of a cum dumpster that's also on fire. Star Citizen, $400 million fucking dollars, 9 years in alpha state, or well, whatever the fuck they call it, and yet neither Star Citizen nor Squadron 42 are materializing as finished products, nor even a hint that it's around the corner. In my Versus video I looked at the accomplishments of Star Citizen late last year, and really not much has changed in those few months, but the bottom line is, this flaming pile of cash keeps on burning, and I'm just sitting back roasting some marshmallows. With successful early access launch last year, Starbase, yet another voxel-based survival crafting base building game, oddly brought back a little bit of hope for this subgenre of survival games for me. However, all is not well, as on Steam its reviews are not as hopeful. There is a solid game in there somewhere, the mechanics feel snappy and reactive, but as with many early access titles, it requires refinement. Earth Analog, a game that I describe as programmers' show-off project. Last time I looked at this, it had issues of being a game, but overall, clearly, on technical aspect, the developer knows what to do. It's just a matter of time to get the gameplay aspects look and feel like gameplay. I really like this project as it's so clearly technical and very impressive, if you know the shader magic or even just a little bit of programming, so I revere it fondly. For this year, however, developer wants to, and I quote, to further improve on the random system generation and add more interesting phenomenon like nebulas, black holes, etc. Oh, and last year it got, I suppose you could call it on-foot gameplay? Yeah. A space factorio mixed with planetary annihilation. The Dyson Sphere project is an early access title that just chugs along. Overall, the game's all about building. Just like its peers, Satisfactory and Factorio, you know pretty much what you're getting into, so just build, build, build. Overall, we're just left now waiting for a full release, but until then, developers seem to be quite interested and diligent on updating the game itself, which is a positive sign overall. And finally, we end this segment with Empyrion, yet another space survival game that I forgot to include last year's roundup, but not this year. Released in early access in 2020, it keeps on moving forward, as the last big content update was a month ago. So, the project's very much alive and still moving. But even so, again, can't shake the amateurish feel. Not exactly asset flippy, though there is a bit of it in there. No, it's mostly raw and unrefined. Still, it's better than Icarus on ratings on Steam. Though with far less viewer votes too. If I'm serious, then sure, I'm not too enthusiastic about these survival games, since Dual Universe frankly fucked any excitement I could have, but like other projects, I want this to become a real game and maybe compete with, well, I don't know, Space Engineers or something, so good luck! Now then we move on to the old fartbags, the games that released a long time ago. Well, actually, not that long ago, but still gets frequent updates and even proper refreshments, if I English very well, danke. Here we get the usual suspects, the leading faces of the space sims everywhere for the late 2010s and now early 2020s. Of course, we'll start with Elite Dangerous. In middle of 2020 received a very long awaited and very long coveted Space Legs update. Odyssey. It was a disastrous shit. The management and executives forced it out of the door like an aged-out orphan. Truly, the game suffered from its greatest downfall ever due to this undeveloped turd. Now, however, in the Steam charts, you can notice a little resurgence from the rock bottom. It really is not a big one, but a steady one at least, as developers finish making Odyssey in the way it should be. Yet by no means the game is still performing the way it should, even by developer own accounts, so there's a long road ahead. Console release has been postponed indefinitely till performance can be developed and finished, but no word has been given as to what the progress really is even. Just that we're working on it. Bottom line, Frontier is obligated to support DLCs for the 2 years. Now, in this year's May, Odyssey will celebrate its first year. Will console launch really actually happen is anyone's guess, but make no mistake. Frontier is a money-grubbing company, as they proved with Odyssey. They will make sure to get that last squeezed milk bucket out of this cow with consoles, one way or the other. That we can be pretty sure of. Oh, and yes, Elite has a demo, but it honestly is horribly outdated, literally since launch. On a far more positive note, the German X4 Foundations has been chugging along as Egosoft is gearing up to release the 5.0 DLC this year, The Tides of Avarice, and accompany it with the base game update too. Overall, though, they are still to this day refusing to submit to my requests for better UI, the lads over at Egosoft get my respect for continued and diligent work on their game. And then we come to No Man's Sky. For the future content, no one knows what the fuck's coming, and literally days before the release we only get a heads up. But as for the accomplished work, well, last year they celebrated 5-year anniversary, and indeed, what a journey they've had. Alongside with all that, yet more again, genuinely good updates, which at this point is the game's modus operandi, and what a good place to be in. Unlike, well, some other MOs that we know of. Now returning then to some strategy games. Stellaris been enjoying a rather nice last year, with Aquatics being the latest update. Of course, as it goes with Paradox, it's a paid DLC, but the base game also gets improvements alongside. Now for this year though, well, I've been asked not to disclose any information or details, but if you look at Paradox MO with Stellaris, well, rework mechanics and features for the betterment of the game surely to come. Soon too. Seems this year I'm stumbling upon some really cool games. Exo One is a rather unique experience that, sure, is not exactly the deepest one, but still, it's something unique that is rather welcome when done well. Released last year with a free demo prologue a year before that is a little gem that at least is worth loading up, so I do recommend it. And another game with a demo, this time most mainstream looking one from Deep Silver, Chorus, a space combat pew-pew game. While I'm more partial to Everspace myself, You might as well call Chorus the Star Wars Squadrons of 2021. A very pretty and polished looking game with the top-notch animations, even cinematics and presentation, but mostly competent and okay game underneath. So yeah, generally pretty decent release, but space combat games, well, they're quite heavily limited at the best of times. And finally, Space Engineers. It's still around and even updating. From the last year's content update, the game has plenty of life in it and still takes the throne of voxel sandbox games. Build, dig and screw around. For the price, it's decent, if a bit frustrating experience. Still, for this year, their plans are to release the Warfare update with, well, you guessed it, combat-based improvements, content and whatnot else. One thing you can't fault Space Engineers for is working with the community, as they do, and while it's not always the smoothest, it's nice to see that interaction and collaboration. So good luck, engineers, release a good one. And for the last little bit, a quick run through of honorable mentions, or just mentions so that y'all stop mentioning things in comments. Okay, starting with Rebel Galaxy. Personally, I really like this game for multiple reasons, but it hasn't been updated in a little while, so it seems that the game is more or less done. Stellar Warfare. Early access still gets updates, as it should, but yeah, I got nothing on this one. Not my type of a game. Star Wars Squadrons. Now, when it comes to space, it's hard to go anywhere without mentioning Star Wars and it stinking up the place. As it happens, right now the game is already set in maintenance phase, so yeah, as said, space combat games are limited, but it's worth noting that this one was an okay release, and no less from EA, so maybe it's worth picking up on a sale. Outer Wilds. A beautiful, unique release, but it's done. The game is still cool, but it's done, and that's fine. And then there's the Warframe, a game that in its 9 years managed to go beyond just space ninjas with lame abilities to even break into spaceship combat games and beat half of the population. It's remarkable how much they've changed and added to the game. In recent times, the new war story missions have come out, a wonderful addition overall, and no doubt we'll see more good things from Digital Extremes in the future. Hardspace Shipbreaker. Blackbird's Interactive's last space game. A decent methodical experience that still gets a few updates, but the developer is working on Homeworld right now, as I mentioned earlier. That's their focus now. Avorion. Surprisingly still gets updates. A decent enough game, but not my cup of tea. Now, stop mentioning it, damn it! After almost 12 years, still in early access, Space Engine, unlike Star Citizen, is forgiven. Since, well, it's not really a game, and it's developed by a guy. Overall, it's more of a fun project it seems, but hey, still gets updates, so that's very cool. And finally, whatever Star Atlas is. Selling NFTs! Crypto blockchain bullshit! What the fuck is this? And that's a gameplay trailer? What the fuck is this? There you have it, and more or less the complete list of active and new or ongoing space games for 2022. I thank all the developers who managed to reply and share information. It's always really cool, especially those 1 to 2 people teams. Regardless, as always, these kinds of videos I can afford to make because of you, and more so thanks to the greater or smaller support over at Patreon or YouTube members. Seriously, thank you glorious bastards. And if you too want to support the content I make, or just reward me for just making stupid jokes or something, go check out Patreon. Down below links all the stuff, as well as Discord, you know. And of course, mention the games that I forgot, as always, and I bet there will be plenty of them.